Hello guys, welcome back to another episode here on African Confessions. There is a message that I want to share with you guys. It was sent to me by one of our brothers. Then we had to try as much as we could to do a translation of that story that he sent to me. After asking him a lot of questions, that was when he came up with the full story. So this is the conversation that I had with him. Hello, how are you, Brother Nashi? Can you please post for me as anonymous? I am a man who is aged 33 years. I have come to confess the rituals that I did and how it all began. What I noticed, my brother, is that when you go for these rituals, you do not even tell yourself that in the end, sacrifices will be required from you. And one thing that I have found out about us as human beings, we always think that we are a special case and what has happened to another human being will never happen to you. Such was the case that happened to me, because when I started visiting all of these witch doctors, I had told myself that I was going to succeed in whatever I was doing and all of the sacrifices will never be required from me. Growing up, I came from a very strong Christian background, and when I was more mature, let me say, when I became a truck driver assistant, I was still there in South Africa. I was working for this other trucking company called Name Hidden. That was when I was introduced to this other thing called amadlozi. I don't know if that is the correct word, but the man that I was working with, he was the main driver, but he was a Ndebele speaking man and he respected his ancestors. There were a couple of rituals that he would do before he would get on the steering wheel, a lot of rituals, and it seemed as if his ancestors did all that he asked from them. Because the money that he was getting from his salary, you could actually see that this man, he knew what he was doing with his life. But as for me, money will just come flying into my pockets. Then after 3 days, I'll be broke. And whenever I will tell him that I was broke, you will say that it is because you have not taken the time to thank your ancestors. After you have gotten your salary, the first thing that you are supposed to do is that you have to thank your ancestors for the other ones that would have brought the salary into your pockets. So he said that if you do not thank your ancestors, that is the reason why money will always come flying into your pockets, and it will come flying out of your pockets because you will be so unthankful. So this man and I, we started consulting with local traditional healers when I was still there in South Africa. Mind you, all of these things, I did them in secret because the majority of my relatives, they are Christians. So there was no one whom I wanted to know that I was busy trying to have communication with my ancestors. When I was doing all of these consultations in secret, that was when I came back home after I had a little accident and I decided to travel back home. Then I met with this other man. When I met with that traditional healer, he then claimed to have spoken with one of my uncles during the ceremony because he fell to the ground and he got into a trance, and he said that all that time when he had fallen to the ground, it was because he had been speaking to one of my ancestors. He said that this ancestor of mine, he had gone to work in the mines back in those days when there was still apartheid, and that ancestor of mine, he used to work in the mines there in South Africa, and he had chosen to rest upon my life, seeing how much I had suffered, and he wanted to give me great wealth. But he then said that we had to brew traditional beer and invite the spirit of my ancestor back into our homestead so that the spirit of our ancestor can then bring great wealth into the family. But when he told me that we had to brew this traditional healer and all of my relatives, they were supposed to be available and present to witness this bringing in of the spirit of our ancestor back into our homestead. For me, this was like a tall mountain to climb, knowing that my relatives would refuse me to perform that ritual, as that traditional healer was telling me all of the rituals that were supposed to be performed, and these rituals, they were supposed to be performed back in the village from where our family comes from, where our bloodline started. I knew that none of my relatives would ever allow me to perform such a ritual, let alone to perform this ritual at the family compound. Then that traditional healer, when he looked at me and he saw that I was too much troubled, he said that this ritual had to be done as quick as possible. He told me that there was no way that he could refund me this money because this money had been accepted by his ancestors. I was so heartbroken because the money that I had paid for these rituals to be performed, it was quite a lot. When I had entered into the consultation room, I didn't know that this is what the rituals would require for them to be performed. So before I could return back to South Africa, then that man called me and he said that you should come back. He told me that when he had left, that was when one of his ancestors visited him in his dream, and he said that since we shared the same totem, him and I, then it meant that at one point in time, me and him, we shared one common ancestor, so he could stand in my place of becoming my relatives. That was how we then did the ceremony, but we didn't travel back to the village where our bloodline started. We performed this ritual at the place where that traditional healer was staying. The way that we performed this ceremony, I had to buy some brewed beer because at his place they always had brewed beer. So I bought the brewed beer, but he told me that he didn't want any banknotes. He only wanted this money in form of coins. I struggled so much because everyone knows that here in Zim, for you to get hold of coins, it is very difficult. So I went to those people that are called money changers. Then when I had gathered all of those coins, I went back to him. When I asked him why he wanted me to give him all of these coins, he said that back in those days when our ancestors were still alive, they used coins, so they do not recognize the banknotes that we are using today. That is why whenever rituals are done, coins are always required. So after I had given him the coins, he then told me that we could perform the rituals because as far as my ancestors knew, he said that since I had paid him for the services of him giving me the brewed beer that was already there at his place, my ancestors would think that it was me who had brewed this beer. Then we began with the rituals. As a man who had never done these rituals, Brother Nashi, I was so confused because at that time he said that I had to kneel down as if I was praying. This was quite strange to me, and as I was kneeling down, what I was supposed to do is that I should be pouring the brewed beer onto the ground, then asking the spirit of my ancestor, the spirit of my uncle. I had to ask it so that it can lead me back to South Africa, so that it will be walking in front of me and find great wealth just like my uncle had done when he was still alive working in the mines. The spirit of my uncle then came and I fainted, but I do not remember what happened. But all that I remember is that when the spirit of my uncle came into that consulting room, then I started feeling very hot and cold at the same time, like I had a fever. Then I saw a great tall black man that was standing in front of me holding a spear in his right hand and a shield. This shield, it was made out of animal skin. He was holding this shield in another hand, but the shield was not a very long shield. From there on, I collapsed to the ground and I lost all consciousness. Upon waking up, then that traditional healer that was standing in place of my relative said that my ancestor had spoken with him through me and told me all of the great gifts that he wanted to give me, but more ceremonies had to be done on me so that I can receive all of these gifts.